So the Las Vegas Raiders rookies reported to training camp last week, and the veterans are reporting tomorrow. And today, I'm very excited to talk about some of the storylines and some of the things that we need to keep an eye on as we get into camp, as the season kind of progresses. These are some of the things that I think will really determine the outcome for the Raiders this season. Can the Raiders get on path where they're going to start competing for Super Bowls over the next 2 to 3 seasons under Geno Smith and Pete Carroll? Or will that not happen, right? I think some of what we're going to see in training camp will help kind of answer some of those questions. And I want to talk about some of the things that I will personally be keeping an eye on, some of the storylines. I think one of the biggest storylines, right as we kind of get into this, is going to be the health of Christian Wilkins. And more than just health, who steps in if this guy can't play for the Raiders? So last Friday, the Raiders obviously put Christian Wilkins on the physically unable to perform list, which means he'll start training camp on the sidelines. He won't be out there on the field. But interestingly, we got a really interesting video that kind of came out just over the weekend. Alex Bachman, the Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver, was at the facility working out. And in his video, he actually captured a video of Raiders defensive tackle Christian Wilkins. Obviously, this had to have been done on purpose. Maybe Wilkins even asked him to do it. But the video kind of went out there and it's kind of gone viral where Christian Wilkins is actually out there moving. He's moving around. He's looking good. There's no limp. And I think the biggest part of this is just the fact that the boot has officially come off. Christian Wilkins has not seen the field for the Raiders since OTAs, right? He practiced, I think, for like 1 or 2 days and then basically has not practiced from that point forward. We've had OTAs, we've had mini camp, and he has not been out there for the Raiders. And more than that, the most recent time that anyone spotted this guy, he actually had a boot on the foot. So some people thought that maybe he had surgery or, he had that second surgery already. And if it wasn't the surgery, maybe he just had pain and he's needed to kind of keep that boot on. But now we're getting this video where he does not have the boot on and he looks, to me looks pretty healthy. And again, I know he's not hitting people. He's not out there having to take on double teams and he's not putting that pressure onto that foot, so it's a little bit different. But I hope this video here is some sort of indicator that Christian Wilkins may be back for the Raiders over the next 2 to 4 weeks. Maybe even as early as the next couple of days. Maybe he passes the physical and he gets out there for the Raiders. I hope the Las Vegas Raiders can get this guy back into the building healthy and on the field as soon as possible. We've already talked about Christian Wilkins so much, but I also want to talk a little bit about who will potentially step up if Christian Wilkins cannot go for the Raiders, because I think this is going to be a very key part for the Raiders to have success. A couple years back, someone very smart, really respect this analyst. One of the things he said was the best way to get to the quarterback and the quickest way is basically from the inside, right? And I agree 100% with this. The fastest way to get to the quarterback to cause the most disruption is basically going to be essentially, right through those A gaps. B gaps would be next, right? And defensive tackles are the guys that are closest and most able to get through those gaps. For the Raiders to have success on the defensive line this season, I think some of these guys are going to have to step up. And if OTAs and minicamp is any indicator of who the Raiders expect to win out the job or, kind of have success, apparently veteran defensive tackle Zach Carter and defensive tackle Lakai Fotu are the 2 guys that earned the most first team snaps outside of Adam Butler. So those 3 guys right there would probably be the guys for the Raiders. And I'm going to be honest, you guys, Zach Carter, Lakai Fotu, they don't give you a lot of optimism from those 2 guys, right? They are veteran guys. They both played in the NFL for a couple of years now. But both guys have not really proven themselves that they're like, high pressure, high sack, high rate of getting to the quarterback. Those guys haven't really proven that. And I think for the Raiders, you have to be able to get after the quarterback if you're going to want, if you're going to have success, especially given we play 6 games against teams that all have pretty good quarterbacks, right? With the Broncos, we'll see if Bo Nix ends up being good, but I won't lie to you guys. I liked him a lot before he actually got drafted by the Broncos. I think for the Raiders to have success, not only within the division, but just, some of the teams and some of the games we're going to have this season, you got to be able to get to the quarterback. And if Christian Wilkins is out, who steps up? Some people will point to the fact that the Raiders brought in 2 rookies, but, how long has it been since we've seen like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round rookie defensive tackles come in and have success in their rookie seasons? And how often does it happen, right? We get like 10 guys every year drafted, fourth round and after at that D tackle spot, how many of those guys actually have success right away, right? So, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, hey, we're going to rely on JJ and Tonka Hemingway to, go out there and be the guys that kind of lead the defensive tackle room. I would not feel comfortable with that. But who's it going to be, right? Lakai Fotu, Zach Carter are the next two guys that are kind of up there. Can Tyree Wilson potentially jump to the inside and play a little bit of defensive tackle? These are things that I think we have to keep an eye on as we kind of get into this season. We'll see what ends up happening in camp as the Raiders kind of get into it. We'll see within the first couple of fully padded practices, which guys are, essentially going to be kind of thrown in there. Another storyline to kind of keep an eye on is going to be the wide receiver rotation for the Raiders. Kind of like how a lot of this team is kind of built. You look at the D tackles, the linebackers, the corners. The wide receivers kind of fit in that same boat, which is we don't have a lot of experience or at least proven guys at that position. We have Jakobi Meyers, we have Trey Tucker, and I think those two guys are solid football players. But what about the third guy? What about the fourth guy? Right? Which guy for the Raiders is going to step up and be a productive part of the rotation this season? People can point to Jack Bech. People can point to Dante Thornton. But again, both guys are rookies. I don't feel super comfortable with saying, hey, we're going to rely on rookies to be the guys out there to have success. And then even if you do say, okay, Dante Thornton wins out a job or Jack Bech wins out a job, what does the rotation look like? Right? When we need a wide receiver to run deep, okay, Trey Tucker, Dante Thornton makes sense. But what about when we need a wide receiver to catch a jump pass or beat a number one corner to the inside? Right? Which wide receiver runs those routes? Is it Jakobi Meyers? Is it Jack Bech? This is something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on as we kind of get into camp, because I think for the Raiders, you have to know which wide receiver is going to play which role. Right? You got the X, a wide receiver position. You got the Y. You got the Z. You have, guys that might have to run those influence routes. You have guys that are going to have to run across the middle of the field. You can throw Dante Thornton in there in a couple of those different spots. But again, he's a rookie. Do you want to rely on a rookie wide receiver? So I really want to know what the wide receiver rotation kind of looks like for the Raiders. Another wild card is going to be someone like Tommy Mellott. We don't really know what Mellott brings to the Raiders. He's apparently supposed to be our slot wide receiver, but we already have Jakobi Meyers. I think Jack Bech is kind of a slot wide receiver as well. And then Tommy Mellott, although he's a slot wide receiver, he's a little bit different than those two guys, right? So this is something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on to see where every single player kind of fits within the role. And then I also want to see how Chip Kelly can utilize these guys' strengths and then, some of their weaknesses. How can we hide some of these things? Dante Thornton Jr. is not a polished route runner at this point. No matter what people say, he ran those routes at Oregon or whatever, he's just not super, super clean or crisp at this point within those routes. And that's something he can develop right over the next couple of seasons. But, that also means if Dante Thornton's going to run like a dagger concept, is he good enough to create separation running across the middle of the field or hitting that, that dig route across the middle of the field? If Dante Thornton's, needs to separate and he's running some sort of, post route or whatever, can he create that separation at the top of the post? Right? Those are some of the weaknesses he has, right? Just running those routes, being crisp and creating separation. What about a guy like Jack Bech? Where does he fit with the Raiders? Jack Bech is not the fastest guy. So how do you utilize him? And same with Jakobi Meyers, not the fastest guy. How do you utilize him? All right, so I kind of want to see where these guys fit, how they're utilized by Chip. I do think the Raiders wide receiver room is going to end up being a strength for this team. I think Trey Tucker is going to take a massive step this season. I'm at least hopeful that he takes that step. I think he will, right? So we'll see what ends up happening there. Let's go forward. So another thing that I think we have to keep an eye on this season is, and I think this one's going to be a key thing for the Raiders to have success, it's going to be the interior offensive line and how it kind of shapes up, specifically the guard positions for the Raiders. Right now, most people think Dylan Parham, Alex Kappa are going to be your two starting guards, but I don't even think, I don't think that battle is, I don't think it's over, right? I really don't think it's over. I don't think either of those two guys are even guaranteed to start for the Raiders. I think there's a real chance that neither of those guys end up starting. And the battle right now is wide open, right? You can have Dylan Parham potentially starting, Thayer Munford has been doing nothing but playing guard apparently for the Raiders, so he might end up starting. Jordan Meredith has experience starting, and Meredith's going to be the Raiders' backup center, so you might even end up starting him at guard just to have him, he starts at guard, but then he still has that flexibility to be your center. And then you have Alex Kappa, who some people think will be the Raiders' starting right guard. You have a guy like Gerard Hufford, who's a rookie coming in, who has huge potentials for, as a guard. Will Putnam made the roster last year as a UDFA. So there's guys right now that the Raiders have that are going to be battling it out. And again, I think the guard position's wide open. Right there, Munford's played a lot of snaps in the NFL. Dylan Parham has not been healthy. He missed some of minicamp. So, I don't know if the Raiders are going to commit to a guy that can't be fully healthy. So again, I think that job is literally wide open. And I want to see which guy can really step up and kind of take that job away. Now, I do think Alex Kappa, just because of the fact that he's a veteran, he's played, 5,000 plus snaps in the NFL. I do think he'll end up starting at the right guard position, but I don't think he's the best guard. Personally, I don't think that at all. Caleb Rogers could potentially start, right? He'll be competing as well for that guard position as well. I want to see the Raiders put that offensive line unit out there that could, essentially have like that bully mindset, right? That can move people at the point of attack, can take people and move them against their will. I want the Raiders to grow forward with that offensive line, not just like the fastest and quickest O-line because it fits that Chip Kelly, wide zone concept. I want to see us be physical this season. Colton Miller, one of the strongest run blockers. He's a guy that will put people down. Although he's not necessarily nasty, right? He's strong as hell. He's an elite run blocker in my opinion. Jackson Powers-Johnson plays with that physicality. DJ Glaze, strong as hell. Let's build on those three guys right there and let's put in some other guys that are strong. Maybe it's Darren Munford. Maybe it's Caleb Rogers. We kind of saw him do that a little bit in college as well. I want to see the Raiders' offensive line this year really take that next step. And I think a big part of that is going to end up being who starts at guard for the Raiders. If you start Alex Kappa, Cody Whitehair, even Jordan Meredith, you're going to be a little bit weaker on the offensive line. You start a guy like Darren Munford, a guy like Dylan Parham, a guy like Caleb Rogers. Those guys are a little bit stronger than the Whitehairs and the Merediths and those guys, right? And I think for the Raiders to be a bully, you got to get strong, you got to be physical, and it definitely sets the tone, and it'll also allow you to have success on the O-line. So again, one of the things I'll be keeping an eye on is definitely going to be, just kind of how the Raiders' interior offensive line shapes up, and then just kind of the overall offensive line. I think it's going to be pivotal for the Raiders' O-line to really click for them to have success this season and click early, right? Because the unit could be completely different than what we had last year coming into this year. We don't really know who's going to end up starting across the offensive line minus the left tackle and center position. So we'll see what ends up happening as we kind of get into it. Another thing to keep an eye on, and I think this one's going to be key, is going to be Jacorian Bennett. I think Jacorian Bennett has been one of those guys that has shown so much potential, so much upside, but unfortunately he ended up not just being able to stay healthy. And I think that's kind of been one of those things that's kind of killed it for him and kind of his career up to this point. I think consistency is a part of development. I think being able to take 1,000 straight snaps really does help. Playing against 17 different types of offensive coordinators, wide receivers, just kind of what teams do, just being able to have all those snaps and playing multiple different schemes, especially at the corner spot, I think makes you so much better. And Jacorian Bennett hasn't really been able to do that. In fact, if you take out just the divisional games, how many different schemes has Jacorian Bennett played against, given that he's missed so much time, right? And I say all that not as a shot on Jacorian, but because I really like Jacorian Bennett's tape. I want to see what this guy can do, and I want him to stay healthy, right? He has to stay healthy as we kind of get into it. Jacorian Bennett, to me, shows potentials of like a top 10 corner. Now, I don't know if that's because of the fact that Patrick Graham is known as a guy that runs an elite scheme with the secondary. I don't know if that's because of the fact that maybe we haven't had a good corner for such a long time, and then kind of having Bennett out there, just makes you feel like you have a corner that's legit. To me, what I see with Bennett is a guy that can move well. He has good hips. He's fluid. He's a guy that, statistically has had success as well. So I want to see what this guy can do. And right now, obviously, people are saying, hey, Eric Stokes and Darian Porter are going to be your starting corners. I don't know if I agree with that. I think the best cornerback will end up winning that job, and I find it hard to believe Jacorin Bennett is not better than a rookie coming in, his first year in the NFL. And Jacorin Bennett is not better than a guy in Eric Stokes who's played already 4 years, but a guy that, he's gotten worse and worse and worse over the course of his career, right? In Eric Stokes. Not saying he can't turn it around, but like Eric Stokes was a backup player for the Packers. And when the Packers, essentially let this guy go, no Packers fan really cared, right? As opposed to like when Nate Hobbs left, when Trayvon Merrick left, we all talked about it that, hey, those are losses of good football players. We'll see if Jacorin Bennett can actually carve out a role as the Raiders kind of go forward. And it would also be interesting to see if there's any way Jacorin Bennett could potentially jump to the inside. Now, obviously, we might run a heavy cover 3 scheme, so we might not need a Jacorin Bennett in the slot. Instead, we might put Isaiah Pola-Mao in the slot. We might put a guy like Lonnie Johnson in the slot, right? Guys that are bigger safeties. But I do hope Jacorin Bennett ends up winning out this job. I think he's the best corner, but we'll see what ends up happening. And the thing is, we're going to find out probably within the first 3 or 4 days of training camp what the Raiders think of the battle, right? If Jacorin Bennett continues to run with the second team unit, we'll know at that point what the Raiders kind of feel about him. But we'll see what ends up happening. And then finally, the thing I think, I'll be personally keeping an eye on is going to be the linebacker unit and which linebackers can essentially not only just stay healthy, but like which guys can really get themselves to be like the leader in the room, become the guy, this is my job to essentially lose. What I mean by that is this, Tommy Eichenberg came to the Raiders last season, and I personally felt when Tommy Eichenberg got here, I personally felt that like, hey, the Raiders took this guy in the 5th round. They want to kind of mold this guy to be the long-term solution for the Raiders, right? When the Raiders brought this guy, we had a guy in Robert Spillane, a guy in Divine Diablo. We had 2 guys with expiring contracts, and we knew these guys were probably not going to be here in a year from now. Robert Spillane, we were hopeful he'd come back, but we weren't 100% sure. So the Raiders always had a plan that we need to develop one of these younger guys. And out of nowhere comes Amari Gaynor, and Amari Gaynor looks so much better than Tommy Eichenberg. And regardless of which guy ends up being good, like we wanted one of these 2 guys to step up and become, the linebacker, right? The Divine Diablo, essentially, the guy that could be your linebacker for the next 3 or 4 years. And Tommy Eichenberg's not looked the part at all. In fact, when I watch this guy's tape, it's disappointing as hell. The guy struggles to get off blocks. The guy's not able to get past guards and tackles and centers. He does do a good job reading, but he's just not strong enough to get off of blocks and get off of them consistently. Amari Gaynor did a much better job in my opinion, than did Tommy Eichenberg. I thought coming into the season, Amari Gaynor could end up starting for the Raiders. But then the Raiders go out there and bring in like 4 different veteran linebackers. And when that happened, paired up with kind of what we heard in camp from the linebackers, Amari Gaynor is basically running with like the 2s and 3s at this point. It makes you think like, which linebacker for the Raiders is going to really step up and hold down the job and hold it down long term. And, we could rely on Jermaine Pratt. I think Pratt's a great linebacker. Even right now, I think he'll be really, really, really solid for the Raiders. I think Jermaine Pratt pretty much becomes a leader for the Raiders defense. Landon Roberts, I was never really too high on him. I want to know who outside of Pratt can kind of step up, right? Can it be Amari Gaynor? Can it be Devin White? Can it be Jalen Smith? Can it be Tommy Eichenberg or Cody Lindenberg? Which guy can really step up and then, not only start for this year, but start long term? Because right now it doesn't look like we have a long-term option at linebacker. Again, Jermaine Pratt's a guy I personally really, really like. So I do think the linebacker unit will be solid this year for the Raiders by some combination of Pratt, White, Gaynor, potentially even Cody Lindenberg. We'll see what he kind of develops into. I do think the Raiders linebacking group will be solid with those guys for this season. But again, long term, what's the linebacking room essentially looking like? What's the projection for the Raiders? Someone has to develop that's young and has to be able to hold that job for the Raiders. Because right now, I don't really see that, right? At least I haven't seen it. So we'll see what ends up happening. And then, of course, just to kind of throw this out there, I do also want to just kind of keep an eye on like the health element of this, right? Like Malcolm Koonce is coming back from an ACL injury. Maxx Crosby had his surgery this offseason as well. Colton Miller is now, full offseason post the surgery. He had Christian Wilkins, right? Where's he at health-wise? So these are some of the things that I'll personally be keeping an eye on. If the Raiders are fully healthy as they kind of go forward, this team can truly be elite. I really do think that, because this team, the coaching staff, the quarterback, we haven't had the combination of a good coach and a good quarterback for a number of years, right? Like John Gruden, Derek Carr were solid I think they were solid at some point, but the fact that John Gruden was an offensive guy, we never had that defensive coach on the other side of it. Well, with this staff, it's different. Pete Carroll's a defensive guy, and we have a phenomenal offensive coordinator. So, like, we have it from a coaching staff perspective. And again, I don't know how long it's been since we have had that. Maybe 2016 was the last time we had it, before the Raiders swapped offensive coordinators for whatever reason going into 2017. But I really do think this year's going to be different. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. The veterans do report tomorrow, so I'm sure we'll get a ton of news to kind of get into it. Let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.